On a broadcast tonight, vice foreign ministers of Korea and Japan meet in Seoul in search of ways to mend frosty ties between the neighbors. Korea unveils a plan aimed at turning the country into one of the world's fourth largest oil trading centers. Plus, UN investigators say North Korea is using increasingly deceptive maneuvers to evade international sanctions. These stories and more are next on Primetime News. Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Wednesday, March 12th here in Seoul. I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. For the first time in 8 months, the vice foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan sat down for face-to-face talks on this Wednesday.
But as our Hwang Sung-hee reports, the two diplomats made little headway in resolving the differences that have pushed bilateral relations to a new low in recent months.
After 3 hours of talks in Seoul on Wednesday, the vice foreign ministers from South Korea and Japan failed to make much progress on improving their frayed ties. South Korean Vice Foreign Minister Tae-yong stressed that Japan should refrain from revising history and work towards restoring trust by resolving the unsettled issue of its wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. In response, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Akitaka Saiki said his government maintains the historical perceptions of Japan's previous administrations. Tensions are high between the two neighbors. Seoul feels Tokyo has never officially compensated the so-called comfort women who were forced into sexual slavery during the Second World War. To this day, Japanese politicians consistently make negative comments about the elderly victims. The diplomatic row has taken its toll on the South Korean public's perception of Japan. Public sentiment on Japan is so low that a recent poll released by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies show that South Koreans perceive Japan as a bigger threat than North Korea. According to the Asan poll, more than 65% of the South Korean public feel threatened by Japan, larger than the 60% of the population that fear North Korea. The figure reflects Seoul's overall consensus on Tokyo.
And that, I'm sure, coincides with all the statements about comfort women, the increased attention that Japan is paying towards dokdo. And so all of these things are starting to drive up these threat perceptions now.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is reportedly pushing to hold his first summit with his South Korean counterpart. But President Park Geun-hye is insistent she will not sit down with a leader who fails to acknowledge his country's historical wrongdoings. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Korea is looking into getting UN recognition of sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II.
At the UN Commission on the Status of Women in New York City, Gender Equality and Family Minister Cho Yoon-sun announced that the ministry will try to get documentation of Tokyo's war atrocities listed on UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. Cho said they are identifying items related to sexual slavery by Japan against Korea and neighboring countries and will submit them next year. A decision is expected by 2017. Moving now to a report on North Korea's UN sanctions, which says the rogue state has developed an intricate web of measures to evade UN punishments.
Our Shin Se-min tells us how they've managed to evade bans on their nuclear weapons and missile programs.
Pyongyang has developed a number of sophisticated ways to get around UN sanctions on illegal weapons trading. A UN report was released Tuesday as part of an annual accounting of North Korea's compliance with international sanctions. The report says that the isolated nation has been employing complicated financial countermeasures that made purchases of prohibited products more difficult to trace. It also said the North Korean embassies in Cuba and Singapore are suspected of facilitating illegal weapons deals, including a shipment of fighter jets and missile parts seized on a North Korean cargo ship in Panama last year. The report adds that there is a relatively complex corporate ecosystem of foreign-based firms that help the regime evade scrutiny of its financial dealings. One of the examples cited was a contract by North Korea's national carrier, Air Koryo, to purchase new jetliners in 2012. It said more than 100 payments were structured through 8 Hong Kong registered companies. While the purchase of civilian aircraft is not prohibited under UN sanctions, the report says such unusual activity could be used as a test run for illegal transactions. Officials at Seoul's foreign ministry said South Korea will work with the international community to better enforce sanctions that are already in place. Pyongyang is currently restricted under UN sanctions from shipping and receiving cargo related to its nuclear weapons and missile programs. Importing luxury goods and illicit transfers of cash are also prohibited. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The Korean government has unveiled a set of measures to boost the nation's regional economy by around $13 billion. They include easing development restrictions for mountainous areas and designating provincial development zones that fit with the characteristics of each region. Arirang's Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
The Korean government has been trying to spur the nation's economic recovery, and this time the focus is on regional economies. After a meeting led by President Park Geun-hye to foster trade and investment on Wednesday, the government laid out a set of measures to boost the regional economy. Under the latest plan, the government will help each municipal government develop a specialized industry like film and video industry for the southern port city of Busan and cultural content industry for the southwestern city of Gwangju.
To foster cities with a specialized industry, the government will ease regulations and provide tax benefits.
The government added that it will provide support for business projects that were voluntarily proposed by 56 regional blocks to develop new growth engines. Among measures aimed at helping turning rural areas into economically vibrant spots is the lifting of development restrictions in forested zones. That will allow the construction of commercial facilities in the so-called greenbelt areas. The only exception for such areas has been home construction. Now, the government expects the measures to boost investment in regional economies by around 14 trillion won, or roughly $13 billion. It says no effort will be spared to promote corporate investment, which is the key to revitalizing regional economies. The government emphasizes that while the central government has unilaterally pushed for regional development so far, the measures this time around make local governments take the lead in drawing up their own development strategies. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And another topic discussed at the meeting at the presidential office of Cheongwade was the government's ambitious plan to turn Korea into an oil trading hub for Northeast Asia. Our Na Young-kyung has more on what it takes to realize the goal and some of the challenges that lie ahead.
Becoming one of the world's major oil trading and storage hubs is what Korea is aiming for. Trade and Energy Minister Yoon Sang-jik said Wednesday that $1.8 billion in private sector investment will go into securing oil storage terminals that can hold nearly 60 million barrels of oil. The government says it wants this complete by the year 2020.
Geopolitically, Korea connects China and Japan, has world-renowned refineries, as well as good port facilities. That's why it is seen as the best spot for a new oil hub.
An annual oil trading volume of $25 billion is expected to be generated from 2021, and many billion dollars worth of economic benefits are expected in the next several years. The government hopes the terminals planned to be expanded in the country's southern cities of Ulsan and Yeosu will help the country serve as a major oil trading hub. Policymakers plan to offer favorable loans, tax breaks, and other incentives to oil traders setting up operations here, as well as eliminating red tape to create a better trading environment in the country. But some industry experts point out that the success of the government project will depend largely on the difficult task of building the financial infrastructure for the trading system. A researcher at the Korea Energy Economics Institute told Arirang News that one of the main problems is that the Korean won is not a major currency used in international trade, adding that reaching the government's goal of making Korea Northeast Asia's main oil hub could take well over a decade. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Some welcome news on the job front. The number of newly employed workers in Korea rose at its fastest pace in 12 years in February, showing signs of improvement in the local economy. Our Kim Ji-yeon explains.
The Korean economy may be showing signs of improvement. The number of newly employed workers rose at its fastest pace in more than a decade last month. Statistics Korea says the number of those employed in February stood at 24.8 million, up 835,000 from a year earlier. The figure represents the largest on-year job growth since March 2002. The country's unemployment rate, however, shot up to 4.5%, a half a percentage point increase from the same period last year. In fact, the number of those unemployed stood at 1.2 million in February, the highest level in 2 years. The state-run agency points to an increase in the number of young people seeking jobs for the seemingly contradicting figures that show an increase in both the number of newly employed workers and unemployed people. Those in their 20s who are new college graduates are now searching for work ahead of recruitment season, which runs from late February to April this year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Could a resolution to a nationwide doctor strike be in the making? Just hours after Prime Minister Chung Hong-won proposed talks on ending the dispute by March 20th, the medical community said Wednesday evening that they were open to the idea. The Korean Medical Association, upset over government reforms, says the measures will eventually lead to privatization of the medical sector. And they staged a one-day strike on Monday and plans a 6-day strike beginning on March 24th. That second walkout stands to be larger than the first, as resident staff at Seoul National University Hospital and Asan Medical Center announced they would be participating.
A recent report from the Asian Development Bank found a significant jump in inequality across Asia, with South Korea income disparity ranking 5th among 28 Asian nations over the last 2 decades.
For more on the widening gap between the rich and poor, we bring in Dr. Oh Jin-hwan, professor of Graduate School of International Studies at Ewha Women's University. Great for you to be joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening.
Right, so Professor, tell us, how bad is the wealth gap becoming here in Korea?
Right. There are many indicators that measure economic disparity or income inequality across countries. Let me take the example of the Gini coefficient, which is the most commonly and frequently used methods. Like 0 in the index stands for the perfectly equal distribution, while the 1 is the other extreme, perfectly unequal distribution, where 1 takes everything. The most equal distribution comes from Northern Europe, where their Ginis are somewhere around 0.2 and 0.25. And the other extreme comes from Latin America or Africa, where their Ginis are well above 0.4 or even 0.5. South Korea lies somewhere around 0.3, which is similar to Western Europe or North America, or sometimes even better than that. So if you look at the number itself, it's not that bad. But what is the big problem is it's growing like a rate. So compared with 2 decades ago, Korea is one of the countries that has really a high growth rate of inequality, and that's, I think, where the concern of the study is coming from.
So what is driving this issue, and is it an obvious reason, or is it more of a side effect from other bigger problems?
If we go to the some principle of economics textbook, that there's a first a principle that we are facing is a trade-off between efficiency and inequality. So if we pursue more efficiency, we might end up losing equality. So in that case, some policies that promote some more efficiency, some pro-growth policies, that can be a driving force for this inequality as well. So if you look at that as something that we cannot avoid it, then maybe it's some fundamental trade-offs.
So how can this trend affect Korea's economy?
Right. The thing is that the Korea's economy is different from what it used to be. The Korea is used to be kind of one of the most rapidly growing economy, and but the things are changing internally and externally. But what we are doing, what we are some implementing is pretty much similar to what we used to do before. even though our situation is changing. So what we are facing and what we are doing is quite different, and I think that the gap is where the problem starts.
So is this a problem that we can fix head on? Are there policies that can actually be adopted to address this issue?
If we focus too much on this growth, then we might end up losing this equality. But if we focus too much on this equality, we might lose some momentum for further growth. So what is really important to have that balance between those two, but which is really difficult to achieve. And for example, if I take the example of the FTA, free trade agreements, that is a really good example for the one country to increase the size of the economic pie. That's what they say. So we can get some overall gains from trade. But it does not mean that everyone in the country will be happy about that. A certain sector who will be worse off after this trade, and a certain sector who will be gaining from trade. But we really have to focus on those kind of losing sectors. But what we are most interested in is how much we can gain, how much the size of the pie we can increase. We don't really pay too much attention to this kind of dark side, like this kind of compensation schemes. How can you protect? How can you compensate those kind of losing sectors? That is where we really have to pay some extra attention to it.
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Oh Jin-han from Ewha University. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
And moving now to some of the top stories on the global front, from the mystery of the Malaysian airliner to Chile's first female president being sworn in for a second term, we now go over to our Paulie at the News Center.
So, Paul, let's start with the latest in the search for that missing plane. Any new clues?
Well, frustrations are mounting after 5 days of search efforts with still no sign of wreckage from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The international teams have further expanded their search after earlier reports of military radar signals came to a dead end. Our Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
The search for a missing Malaysian airliner stretched into its 5th day on Wednesday, with still no concrete evidence to explain what happened to the plane and the more than 230 people who are on board. With no sign of the plane, the search area has been expanded to an area that stretches all the way from China to the Andaman Sea, west of Thailand. This after Vietnam briefly scaled down its search operations after saying it had been getting mixed signals from Malaysia over the flight path of Flight 370. Authorities continue to look for clues that may explain what happened.
I think there's a lot of speculation right now. Some claims of responsibility that have not been, confirmed or corroborated at all. We are looking at it very carefully.
The Malaysian military says the plane was in the air for over an hour before it vanished from radar and had traveled about 500 kilometers off course. It added that the plane's transponder and tracking devices were switched off after the plane veered off track. Some experts speculate that there might have been a sudden electrical malfunction on the plane, pointing out that backup power would only last an hour. Officials have not ruled out the possibility of pilot suicide, as transponder signals are controlled in the cockpit. Adding to the confusion, a Malaysian newspaper quoted Malaysian Air Force Chief Razali Daud on Tuesday as saying that military radar had tracked the missing plane to the Strait of Malacca. Razali denies he ever made the comments. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Let's move now to the latest developments in the Ukrainian crisis. Kiev's government has stationed troops along the Crimea border and mobilized air defenses after interim leaders established a new National Guard in response to what they called Russian aggression. As of Tuesday, Ukraine had as few as 6,000 combat-ready infantry, while its air force was outnumbered nearly 100-1 by Moscow's fleet. Ukraine's interim Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk will meet with U.S. President Barack Obama on Wednesday. Yatsenyuk will then address the UN Security Council Thursday, where he's widely expected to condemn Crimea's upcoming referendum to join the Russian Federation and appeal to Western powers for assistance. Heading over to South America, Chile's first female president was officially sworn in on Tuesday for her second term in office. Michelle Bachelet's first term ran from 2006 to 2010. The 62-year-old socialist leader was inaugurated at a ceremony in the port of Valparaiso, which was attended by foreign dignitaries, including the presidents of Argentina, Brazil, and Colombia. Bachelet campaigned on a promise to address social inequality. She's also pledged to overhaul the country's education and healthcare systems through tax reforms. Analysts, however, say she has her work cut out for her, as Chile's economy has slowed in recent years. And in the United States, an American senator has publicly accused the CIA of spying on Congress. Dianne Feinstein, who chairs the Senate's Intelligence Committee, says the CIA improperly searched the computers of congressional staff who were investigating the controversial interrogation methods during the George W. Bush administration. Feinstein criticized the agency for allegedly obstructing the oversight probe and demanded an apology for what she called inappropriate actions. CIA Director John Brennan dismissed the accusations, saying that nothing could be further from the truth. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. South Korea's two ice queens, figure skater Kim Yeon-ah and speed skater Lee Sang-hwa, took center stage at the 19th annual Coca-Cola Sports Awards, which took place here in Seoul this Wednesday afternoon. For their efforts at the Sochi Winter Olympics, Kim and Lee were named the co-winners of the ceremony's highest award, which recognizes the best amateur athletes of the year. Kim won a silver medal at the Games to go with her gold from the 2010 Vancouver Games. Meanwhile, Lee successfully defended her gold medal in 500-meter speed skating in Sochi, becoming the first Korean and third woman ever to repeat in the event. Now let's get to football. Superstar Cristiano Ronaldo is not only arguably the best footballer in the world, he's also the richest. He landed on top of Goal.com's annual money list, having earned a ridiculous 148 million euros last year. That's $205 million US. And first with the Ballon d'Or, and now with the money list, Lionel Messi fell short of his rival yet again, earning slightly less, but still a not too shabby $202 million. And heading to the pitch for the Champions League action, Messi and Barcelona are looking to put away Manchester City in the second leg of their round of 16 matchup. With Bayern Munich and Atletico Madrid advancing the day before, Barca hopes to follow them as they take a 2-0 aggregate lead into the match at home. Now kickoff is scheduled for Thursday at 4:45 a.m. Korea time. Meanwhile, going on at the same time, PSG looks to step over Bayern to get to the quarterfinals. And back here in the nation, the KBL playoffs tipped off on Wednesday with 4th place ET-Land Elephants hosting the 5th place KT Sonic Boom in Incheon. Now, as the first game usually dictates the series outcome, both teams come in looking for the win. Now KT starts off by pounding the paint, taking a 12-point lead into halftime. But Ricardo Powell turns the Jets on and ET-Land climbs back into it. Well, there's a chance at the end of the game, but KT holds on to win Game 1, 69-67. Now it's the V-League. KEPCO and Uricard face off in Suwon. Now Uricard, which is locked for the playoffs, takes the first set from the last place KEPCO. But KEPCO shows life, taking the next set. Uricard answers back, but again, KEPCO is on their tail. It goes to the final set, but in the end, however, it's KEPCO who gets the win, 3-2. That's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
We finally got some spring rain here in Seoul, which took away the dry conditions.
For more, let's connect live to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Good evening, guys. Some welcome news as nationwide dry weather advisories have finally been lifted. A heavy rainfall watch has been issued on the mountains of Jeju, which may see more than 80 millimeters of precipitation through later tonight. Most parts of the country will see between 5 to 30 millimeters of rain and 3 to 10 centimeters of snow is forecast on the mountains of Gangwon-do province. Taking a closer look at the current conditions, The nationwide precipitation will gradually stop as the rain clouds are moving down south at 30 kilometers per hour. Well, it has stopped raining here in the capital. However, it's still raining in most parts of the country, which will continue through tomorrow morning. Currently, humidity levels in Seoul have soared to 85% and even 100% in some regions. Moving on to Thursday's readings, Seoul starts off the day at 4 degrees with a high of 10. Meanwhile, cities down south will continue to see showers with a daytime high of 8. Moving on to other regions, Jeju and Dokdo peak at 9 and 5 degrees, while Mount Kumgang tops out at -3. That's all for now, and I'll be back with more after 10.
Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that's our broadcast on this Tuesday night, Wednesday that is. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.